Hello everyone, and welcome to our first Cerini connection for 2024. I know that in January we did our nonprofit trend report, so we didn't do a Cerini connection. Today I have with me, and I'm actually super psyched to have with me Bonnie Hagen, who's the COO of Bright Energy Services. And we're going to be discussing such topics as energy efficiency. We'll talk a little bit about renewable energy and what that is. We'll talk, obviously everybody's concerned about going green and everything else. So, this is really the future of where, building, construction, thought process, and everything need to be. So first of all, thank you, Bonnie, for joining us today. And we really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Ken. It's a pleasure to be
So
here.
I was going to say, so before we get started, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about what you do? And that would be a good place to start.
Sure. Um, I am co-owning Bright Energy Services, which is a hybrid firm. We do engineering and construction, and we help large buildings save energy and save money and help them meet energy code compliance and help them be comfortable at the same time. A lot of energy has to do with occupant comfort. Some people are cold, some people are hot, and we try to make everyone comfortable in a cost-efficient way.
Okay, so when you talk about those and you talk about the whole aspect of, comfort and energy and all of this other stuff, how are you working with companies and organizations to create a more energy efficient environment?
So the first step we do in working with a company is an audit. We have to measure what is happening within the building and understand it, and also look at the energy bills to identify trends. Because if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. You can't put a strategy in place to reduce energy consumption. A big mistake that I've seen people do is they go immediately and they change out their lights to LED on their own. They have their facility manager do it. And what they're not doing is they're not looking at the space, and maybe they're trading energy efficiency for lower light levels, which can be hazardous in some spaces. So it's important to really measure before you go out and make changes, so that when you make the changes, you don't have you're not deficient anywhere else, so that the only thing you're really reducing is the energy usage.
So when you look at an energy audit, you're really looking at that energy audit across multiple thresholds. You're looking at it from the perspective of how can we create a more energy efficient environment, but you're also looking at it in terms of operations and how that fits into the operations of the organization or company.
Absolutely. The audit also includes an interview with the facility managers and people who work or live in those spaces.
Okay. And when you're doing this, is it better to look at an existing space? Is it better to, get you involved in a new, or it doesn't really matter what the project is? You can kind of help anywhere along the way.
We can help along the way. We like to get in early, because, and we mainly work with existing buildings that have legacy technology in them, because those are the ones that have to, come up to code, and those are the ones that are leaking energy like crazy. But we like to look at the buildings from the beginning, because then we can identify solutions that not only save energy, but that also can be rebatable by the local utilities. We work in lockstep with the utilities, so that when people make these energy efficiency upgrades, we can somehow, some way supplement the cost of those projects.
Okay, so you kind of talked about a bunch of different things. So let me kind of ask a question. It's going to be, I apologize, it'll be kind of a two-part question. So you talked about the fact that you work to help develop strategies to kind of help companies to become more efficient and everything else. So what are some of those strategies? Maybe you can give some examples of what you've been able to do and how you've been able to successfully help organizations to be more efficient.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll give an example, like for HVAC, which stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. Very often buildings will, turn on the HVAC system early in the morning, and then, turn it down at night, not turn it off, but turn it down at night. And that's irrespective of how many people are in the building. So it doesn't have to be an on-off situation. Um, but obviously if you have more people in the building, you'll need more air conditioning. If you have less people, you'll need less. So we can do variable speed technology for HVAC systems that kind of and temperature set points that can accommodate the number of people in the building. So this is where the interviews with the building management on how the building is being used and how it's being occupied at the different times of day can help develop a strategy for lowering energy usage.
Okay. So you talk about, developing strategy. What are some of the key considerations that we need to be thinking about? I know you mentioned, number of people, time of day, but what are the most important, I guess, key considerations that are really going to drive results?
So one thing, there are multiple things, but one thing we always look at as the municipal code for where the building is, because if we're going to make any changes, we want to make sure we comply with the energy code. New York has the strictest energy code. In New York City has the strictest energy code in the entire nation. And it's even stricter, 5% stricter than the rest of New York State. So depending on where the building is, we look at that. We look at comfort, like I mentioned before. In many offices, I've seen two people sitting next to each other, and one has a fan on, aiming at them, and the other has like a foot heater and a sweater on. So, you have to balance that. So we take into consideration people's comfort, and we take into consideration the financials. It's nice to be green, but it needs to make sense financially as well. And so with any energy analysis that we do for someone, we also do a financial analysis where we explain how much the project will cost, how much we can get in rebates, how much energy will be saved on an annual basis, which translates directly to savings in operating expenses on the energy bill. And we figure out a return on investment, how long it will take to get that initial investment back.
Yeah, I was going to say, because that's kind of an important consideration, because I think the reason a lot of people kind of shy away from, some of the more green initiatives and alternative energy sources is because there's typically a fairly large upfront cost, and then you've got to figure out A, where that money's going to come from, and then B, how long is it going to take you to recoup those funds? And at the end of the day, is it really worth it to do it? So you want to touch a little bit on that?
Sure. There are organizations out there that recognize exactly that. These things, building technology is not cheap. HVAC systems easily run into the six figures, lighting systems, pipe insulation and roof insulation, and all these things cost a lot of money. So the utilities across the country have multiple programs to help supplement the cost of those. There are also tax benefits, and I'm sure you can probably speak better than I could on the tax benefits, but I do know that a lot of organizations look at Section 179D of the tax code for tax deductions, where you can get up to I believe it's $1.88 per square foot for upgrading your lighting, your HVAC, and your building envelope, which is, basically insulation of your walls and your roof and sealing around windows, things like that. And that requires an energy analysis, which brings me back to my first point. If you can't really manage something if you don't measure it. So if you measure it and you have an engineering analysis that shows what your savings are, there's more money available to you through that Section 179D. And then there are all sorts of other agencies that are helping people go green and pay for it, specifically in disadvantaged communities. There are, let me give, for example, NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Corporation has authority has a program for electric vehicle charging stations to help those who lived in low and moderate income disadvantaged communities, like apartment buildings, for instance, install them at a cheaper rate than everybody else. So there's money out there. It just you have to know where to get it and at what stage in the process to apply for it. And which is why I said earlier, always get us involved early, because sometimes once you get to a certain point, you can't get that money retroactively.
Yeah, I mean, there's also, as you were saying, there's also credits available for solar,
Yes.
which is again another option. And that those credits historically have only been for for-profit businesses, but now there's new opportunities for nonprofits to take advantage of some of those solar credits also. So it's the whole aspect of trying to go green and the government providing more and more incentives for business and everything to be more energy efficient and for create more renewable energy sources. They've made more credits available. So, and they're making them again more widespread.
Right, right. They have to, because they put a law in the books that said by the year 2040, which is not that too far away, they want to have they want 100% clean energy in use. So that means everybody has to swap out their existing energy systems, and that is not cheap. So in order for them to get that kind of compliance, they have to be able to offer those financial incentives.
I think you're also looking at more and more companies are looking to be environmentally friendly. So again, it comes down to cost, and there's that balance between cost and creating that benefit to the environment. And I know I'm seeing it much more where companies are saying, by X year we want to have a zero energy footprint and everything else. So do you get involved in that stuff, and what are you seeing on that front?
Yeah, so sustainability is a big buzzword, and it means a lot of things. And there are financial benefits tied into going green. And when an organization embarks on an energy efficiency or sustainability program, it also makes that business or that organization more sustainable financially, because they're reducing their operating expenses, and not only for energy, but for policies within the building, whether it's, recycling or printing on double-sided paper or things like that. So it's more than just energy. We're seeing that people are interested in just reducing the carbon footprint, or the footprint, I should say, even water efficiency, low flow toilets, and things like that. And a lot of people will have educational seminars kind of like this for their employees or for their tenants, so that they can make it more personal to themselves, not just organization wide.
What do you see as the low hanging fruit for most of the businesses that you go in and you talk to? What is the thing that's kind of sucking out the most energy, and kind of you can make a quick change?
The quickest thing to change is lighting. So many places still have fluorescent lights, and LEDs use so much less energy than fluorescents. And you could see the result in the very next month's energy bill. You don't need to wait for a heating or cooling season, because you use your lights every day. And it involves minimal construction. You don't need to, for instance, have cranes come and, close off a neighborhood to lift a 20-ton unit on top of a roof. It's very easy to switch out to LED lighting.
One of the other things I see is that, and maybe it's different in some of the newer construction, but some of the older construction, I mean, there's lights everywhere. It's like you go out and you have the strips of lights, across the rooms and stuff. And, some of it is just, turn less of them on. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it's even simple stuff like that.
right.
Um,
Exactly.
what are some of the challenges, that you see in transitioning to some of the alternative energy sources, such as solar or anything else? So what have you seen as some of those biggest challenges?
So bef before I mention that, I just want to make sure everybody knows that solar is what we recommend people do after they've already become energy efficient. So first look at your lights and your HVAC and your building the shell of your building envelope, and your insulation, your pipe insulation. And once you become energy efficient, then go to solar. So many people go to solar first and they buy a system or rent or how lease a system that's much bigger than they actually need. It's kind of like buying a suit and then going on a diet. You want to go on the diet first so that you get the right size suit and you don't overpay. So that's the first thing. So I see a lot of trending of people wanting to go solar right away. And I say, time out, let's take a step back. And then when we get them to solar, people are starting to think about something called microgrids. Because we've been having so much extreme weather due to climate change, people want to be self-sustaining and island from the grid if they need to. So solar is a very important part of it. And companies are starting to look at battery storage so that if something happens at night and the solar can't collect the sun, they still have energy stored, and some level of redundancy, and power generation, so that they can keep the lights on and the air conditioned if the power goes down for any extensive period of time from the grid.
And I think you're going to see, I mean, they are definitely working on obviously better batteries and stuff that will be able to store more energy at a much lower cost. So I think you're going to see much, much more of that over the next 5 or 10 years.
I think you're right.
In addition to solar, what other alternative energy sources or reusable, renewable energy sources are you actually seeing out there in the marketplace? Because I think solar is the one that we hear the most about. Solar is the one that is catching all of the press and everything. But what other things are you seeing out there that people are going for, and how have they been working?
In other parts of the country, I see um, wind being used. It's very hard here because, believe it or not, there are maps of the air and current flows over the cities, and the windmills have to be at a certain height to get the blades to spin and generate the energy. And there are local laws about the distance from the windmills. God forbid something falls. So we're so densely populated here that it's not always the current state of it isn't you know isn't really conducive for this part of the country. But I know like in Rhode Island they have some offshore wind, which might make its way over to New York. I don't know. I haven't seen it so much here. I know there's some hydro being being promoted through some utilities, so you can get your energy from a hydro source. Um, but you're right. Solar is the one that everybody talks about right now in this area of the country.
So there is a question in the chat, which I'm going to throw out. Someone, and it's kind of a little bit of a specific question, but I'll throw it out. Have you been involved in the conversion of an office building to a residential space? And if so, were you able to ensure that conversion was not only in alignment with existing codes, but kept the building and design green?
We've
And how
been
would it look? Go
we
ahead.
have we have converted spaces. Yes, absolutely. So the trick, I don't want to say the trick, but usually when you convert spaces and the usage is different, you have to look at realigning the light fixtures so that they're over the proper places. So it's usually in the utility programs, they do a 1-for-1 swap. So if you have one fixture and you're swapping it out for another more energy efficient fixture, they will give you a rebate for it. They don't give you rebate for those redesign services. They're really only interested in energy efficiency. So if there's something architecturally significant, with the light fixtures that you want, or some sort of functionality that doesn't have to do with wattage, like color changing, that of course is a design thing that if you're looking for the utility to help compensate you for that part is not that doesn't happen. But we do those types of projects, and we do get whatever the utility is able to give you for those swaps.
So when you're working with the utilities, from what it sounds like, you have to be able to substantiate and support the fact that you've created some level of energy efficiency. How is that measured? And you talked earlier about return on investment in terms of, so how are you measuring the energy efficiency? How are you tracking that? And how do you kind of figure that in upfront in terms of trying to decide whether a project is worth doing or not worth doing?
So what we do is when we speak with a client, we ask them to give us access into their utility account so we can see the history and what kind of rebates they're eligible for. By them giving us access, it doesn't commit them to doing a project or spending any money. It just allows us to, to really understand what's happening in the building. And then we'll send auditors over to I'll keep it simple for now. Let's just talk about lighting. To, let's say, count every single light fixture and every single bulb in that light fixture and understand what the wattage is and what the usage of the space is. And then we figure out, and we take photos of everything, and we figure out, we come back to the office and we figure out if there's a fixture that's 100 watts and we put another fixture that looks just like it in there, but it uses only 40 watts, then we're saving, those 60 watts every time the fixture is turned on. So we'll also know, how many hours per day that fixture is used or how many hours over the year. And then we can actually multiply the number of hours by the number of watts to get a kilowatt hour savings.
Right.
And if you
Okay.
look at your Con Ed bill, you will see that you get charged per kilowatt hour. How? Because if you have your lights off and you're not using them, you're not being charged for that. So we do a lot of a room by room analysis in a building that includes every single fixture, that includes how many hours per day the light is on. So we can figure out if you go ahead and swap that fixture, how much energy you're going to save every year, translate that into how much money you're going to reduce your Con Ed bill by or PSEG or whatever. And then we figure out from the amount it's going to cost and the savings, what the return on investment will be.
Got it. So that's the fiscal side of things. What about the environmental impact side of things? How is that kind of measured? Is it the same thing, or is there a kind of a different thought process in terms of identifying or measuring the overall environmental impact savings that's taking place?
Well, we know how many kWh and how many kW we're going to reduce on a project. It's not magic, it's math. I mean, you can look on a light bulb and see 60 watts, and if you take it out and put in one for 10 watts, you're saving, 50 watts. And what's always fun to do is I like to take those savings and put them into one of those conversion calculators on Google and see if we do this project, it's going to be like saving X number of acres of trees, or it'll be like taking X number of cars off the road for this period of time. And so you can really understand the effect beyond just KW and KWH. You can make it more personable and easier to understand for people who don't deal with energy every day.
Yeah, I think that's also a really, really good soundbite for organizations to use from a marketing perspective on their website, talking to their employees and everything else in terms of, because again, you're right. If I talk about the fact that, we saved, 3,000 kilowatt hours, that's one thing. But if we say we saved 3,000 trees and, the birds and the wildlife and everything that goes with all of that, it's a much more profound or easy to understand message.
Exactly. Exactly.
Somebody was in the chat was asking a question about LL88 lighting. Do you want to talk a little bit about what that is
Sure.
and what the requirements are with respect to that?
Sure. LL stands for local law 88, which is a New York City local law. So it's only for the 5 boroughs. And local law 88 is going into effect the beginning of next year, 2025. And it requires the use of controls for lighting in certain spaces. What do I mean by controls? I mean, dimmers and occupancy sensors, things like that, that reduce energy when there are no people in the space. So for instance, in stairwells that are enclosed in the city, the lights are required to be on 24/7. You can never have them off. But local law 88 mandates something called bi-level lighting, which means that there's occupancy sensors attached or integrated into the fixtures. And when someone enters the stairwell and they're sensed by the occupancy sensor, the light goes on to full power. And then when they exit the stairwell, it goes off full power onto sometimes half power, sometimes 30% power. This stuff has to be determined by engineers. So local law 84 is mandating these types of controls for certain spaces. However, they have not come out with a way to report it yet. The law says we need to report it starting next year in a manner on a form determined by Department of Buildings, but they have not issued the form yet. They've had a number of hearings over the past couple of months, which I've attended, and they've taken comments from people who want to, everybody should want to comply with this local law, but we don't know how just yet. So we're waiting with bated breath, and I hope that answers your question.
Is that going to be for, you said for certain spaces or for all spaces?
Local law 84 is for
Is it
spaces.
84 or is it 88?
I'm sorry, 88. There's also an 84, but that's different. 88 is for spaces over 25,000 square feet, which is, pretty sizable.
Okay, just wanted to make sure because again, if you're dealing with a smaller company or small organization, if it's under 25,000 square feet, they don't have to worry about it there. But it's going to be the building owner then would have to deal with the whole building.
The whole building.
But if I have an individual space within that building, the building owner doesn't deal with my individual space, or do they?
There's well, first of all, you have to look at the lease, but local law 88 has two parts to it. One part is lighting and the other part is submetering. So if you have a smaller space inside the building and you're renting it, you have to be submetered so that you are aware of how much energy you're using so that you can take steps to reduce your consumption. So yeah, there's a whole
there's going to be some requirement on everyone, whether it's a large space or a smaller space, in terms of making sure that you're doing your part in order to bring down energy consumption.
Exactly.
Okay. Kind of switching gears again. I'm sorry, that was kind of a question, so kind of jump back. What do you see as some of the emerging trends in sustainability and renewable energy that everybody should be aware of?
I I can think of two off the top of my head. Before I mentioned microgrids, I think as we talk about not just sustainability, but resiliency during these extreme events, I think it's going to be important for some of these larger organizations, or maybe some that are community-based, to continue their operations by implementing some sort of a microgrid. The other thing, another trend that I'm seeing that's just starting, and I need to learn more about it too, is something called a thermal energy network. And basically that utilizes heat pumps or geothermal underground, where there are pipe loops in neighborhoods, so that you share the thermal energy. So if there's excess from one building that doesn't need it, it's too hot, it goes and it travels to the next building that does need it. So I'm starting to hear a lot of talk and see a lot of meetings about this going on. I don't know of any that are implemented just yet, but I think this is coming in the next few years.
Well, that's going to be interesting, because if I'm generating excess heat and someone else is needing it, how does that work from a credit perspective? How does that work from a cost perspective? How does that work from who pays for what? And, there's always going to be some sort of, the whole aspect right now, if you think about it, with the whole green credits and everything else, where I can buy credits or I can use credits for whatever. Those are all things that I guess will come into play with respect to this also.
I think so. And I think if you look at some solar models, there are people that collect more solar than they need and then it goes back into the grid and they'll see that credit on their energy on their utility bill. And then when they need it from the grid, let's say at nighttime or, during times of excessive energy need, they'll see the bill for it. So it might look something like that. It's still too early to tell, but that's something that's coming.
I mean, the other thing, and there's some of it here on Long Island. You see it a lot in other areas, but you're also seeing that for those companies that maybe don't have access to a roof or something like that for some sort of solar energy, there's solar farms where
Mhm.
there's energy being created, and you can tap into that energy that's being created and still use solar, even though it may not be, in essence, your solar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Um, So, we talked about earlier the fact that, some of this stuff comes with an upfront cost, right? Um, so you're in a situation where, um, how do you pay for that upfront cost? Where do organizations get this money? How do they finance, some of this upfront cost? So there are some innovative ways that you've seen that companies or organizations have been able to sustain their sustainability projects or sustain. I'm sorry, I meant fund or yeah.
There are multiple ways that companies or organizations do this. Obviously, they can go to their bank and get a loan, and there are more and more instruments out there specifically for upgrading to energy efficiency projects. There are, like we mentioned before, the tax benefits that usually doesn't come till later on. There's rebates and my company offers a really cool service. Like, let's say your project, I'm going to use round numbers. Let's say it costs, $100,000, but you're getting a rebate of 70,000. And so your net cost is 30,000. We wouldn't ask you to pay the whole 100,000. We would just ask you to pay to 30,000. And then we would wait for the utility to pay us the 70,000. So, and that could take 6 months or a year. So that helps these organizations with the upfront cost as well.
Okay, that's kind of cool. Um, when you're looking at because you said you go in and you do an energy audit, you're actually going in and you're talking to the employees of the organization and everything else. How do you kind of get everybody on board? How do you engage ownership? How do you engage, if it's a nonprofit organization, the board of directors? How do you get everybody on board so that, everybody is, kind of rowing in the same direction in terms of trying to create that energy efficient environment overall for the organization of the company?
That's a great question. It used to be a lot harder than it is now. A lot of people recognize that when the energy codes change and become stricter, they need to do it. Um, so they're more on board. And if we can show them a positive financial benefit to doing it, it makes it even easier.
But
With
I think that works, and I'll let you finish your thought in a second, but I think that works for ownership and maybe a board of directors. But what about employees and, you know, um, other stakeholders that maybe aren't the ones who are going to benefit from that or feel the benefit of that or necessarily directly feel the benefit of that savings?
so So I'll give you an example of some not-for-profits that we had done this type of work with. When 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 the ownership is saving the money, they can put more of that budget into programming for the participants of the program. So whether it's, a YMCA or a nursing home or a you know, a any sort of not-for-profit, those when you have that extra money freed up, because you're saving energy on your energy bills, you can put it into that programming. The other thing is a lot of people have in their own values, in their own homes. They want to be as environmentally responsible as possible. So you see, particularly the younger generations, wanting to work for an organization that also is sustainability minded and um, and reflects their own values. So I think there's a match there when that happens. I've seen people who have gone to work for places and say, "Oh my gosh, there's no recycling containers for my paper. Like, how can I work for a place that doesn't recycle their paper?" So it's about values and being with like-minded people. And if they're not seeing the results of the money in their own pocket, it's really about how to live your best life. It's really about doing the right thing.
And I think that goes back to what I had said before regarding the marketing aspects of things. Everybody, it's a tight labor market. Everybody's trying to attract and retain quality staff, and you got to look for those differentiating factors. So having that renewable energy, having that green thought process, creating energy efficiency, and being able to talk about how many trees I saved and how many sloths now have homes. I think all of those things are things that are kind of helpful in terms of that communication and telling that story to the outside world, to the people who work within the organization.
I agree. Mhm.
Um, when you go through the process and when you're talking to an organization or a company about energy efficiency or moving to a renewable energy source or any of these things, how important is it to set clear goals, metrics, sustainability initiatives? And again, as I said before, how is that stuff? How should they be tracking all of those things?
The Some places are better at tracking than others. For instance, if you look at your energy bills, there are people that will give me their spreadsheets, years and years of spreadsheets with, by month, how much they spend on energy. Very often they lack the KW or KWH information. They're just looking at the dollars. And it's important to also track the KW, KWH. You can do so that's the first thing. I would look at the energy bills year over year for the same month. I would never compare a summer month to a winter month. Um, I would also have a professional auditor come in once every few years just to make sure that you're on track with your energy efficiency goals. And I would look at other efficiencies too, besides energy, for instance, water efficiency, and just, efficiencies in general, just to make sure the building is operating, um, in peak capacity. Um, there's a law out there called Local Law 87, which encourages buildings over 25,000 square feet to do just that in the city, which involves retro commissioning. So that's looking at all the building systems. And yes, everything may be working fine, but is it working according to manufacturer's specs? Can things be tightened up and efficiencies improved? So that's another thing. It's always about ongoing measurement and maintenance.
Yeah, and you talked about, every so many years having someone come back in and do an energy audit. I think that's super important because things change, right?
Mhm.
There's new technologies, new ways of doing things, new thought processes and everything else. So, having that recurring process happening, I think is super important because, maybe you were energy efficient today and you're at the peak of energy efficiency, but 5 years from now, that might all be antiquated.
Exactly.
you know
Exactly.
and I think with the add-on of AI and everything, you're going to get a lot more where technology is going to be able to monitor everything at all levels at all times, and it's going to be creating whole systems, and as we talk about smart houses, smart buildings, smart everything, in terms of creating much higher levels of energy efficiency as we move on.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Have you seen AI start to emerge into this space, and where have you seen it, and what have you seen with respect to it, or is it still a little too early yet?
I think it's early, but There is technology out there called BMS. It stands for Building Management System. Sometimes they call it EMS, Energy Management System, which really collects all the data from all the building systems at any given time, and it gives facility managers a way to control the building even through their iPhones. So, to start the heat, 5 o'clock in the morning before people get there, and things like that. So there is technology out there. I can only assume that AI is going to make it better, and not need the human intervention, and reduce energy bills even further.
Okay. Switching gears again, I'm sorry, I do that a lot because my
Okay.
mind is super fragmented. Um, any common misconceptions you see out there about sustainability and solar energy adoption that you encounter? And what are they and how do you address them?
I think a lot of people think that if they go solar, they don't need to be part of the grid anymore. They're still going to get an energy bill from their utility. So, when I explain that to people, that they still need to, they're generating the energy, but they still need to get it delivered through the wiring, through the meters, they're still going to get an energy bill for that. Another misconception, which I mentioned before, is that people think that going solar makes them energy efficient. It's just a source of cleaner energy. You really need to look at your other building systems to become more energy efficient, and then go solar. Um, those are those are the big misconceptions that I see.
Okay, so we're winding down in terms of time. We only have a couple minutes left. What are the key couple takeaways that you want people to walk away from today's presentation with?
I think that even if you're not mandated by a municipality to reduce energy consumption, you should do it because there are benefits to doing it: tax benefits, utility benefits, financial benefits, and of course morale and value benefits from the occupants of your spaces. So it's important to do that, and for the sustainability of the planet.
Awesome. So thank you, Bonnie. This was incredible. You shared a lot of information in a relatively short period of time. So we really, really thank you for that.
Thank
Um,
you, Ken.
Thanks everyone for joining us today. We do have coming around for the nonprofit sector tomorrow. We're going to be speaking with respect to the Nonprofit Resource Hub. For those of you who don't know what it is, go take a look at Nonprofit Resource Hub online. And we're going to be talking about with Glenn Landau, who happens to be on the call today also. We're going to be talking about nonprofit infrastructure, navigating needs, spaces, and solutions. You can register for that. It's just put in the chat. You can even click on that and register, or just go to the Nonprofit Resource Hub and sign up there. So stay tuned. We'll let you know what next month's or the months after Cerini Connection is going to be as it comes along. But thank you everybody for participating, and thank you, Bonnie for
Thank
doing a
you.
tremendous job. Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye.